Heartbroken over my best friend's new relationship. I just want my best friend back, but after 10 days of silence, the pressure mounts. How do I bridge this growing gap without pushing her further away? Can our friendship survive this awkward limbo? TLDR, my best friend, whom I usually text 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I have not communicated in 10 days due to tension between her and her boyfriend. How can I break the silence? I am a 25-year-old female, and my best friend is also a 25-year-old female. We have known each other since late 2022. We met through the same post-undergraduate program and developed a very close bond. I mean, we got matching tattoos after a year of knowing each other and typically text each other all day long about every detail of our lives. This will be relevant later. When we met, I was and still am in a long-term relationship, and she has a solid friendship with my partner. She was single when we met, dated a little, but nothing serious. The program through which we met is a 2-year position, so after seeing each other nearly every day for a year and a half, we both moved to different cities. After she relocated, she began dating a man who is 22 years old, and they made their relationship official rather quickly. Before I delve into some details, I want to clarify that this guy is wonderful. He adores her, and I have witnessed how happy he makes her. Another key point is that for both of them, this is their first serious relationship. I visited her shortly after they started dating and met him, and we got along fairly well, although we did not spend much time together because I was mainly there to see her and their relationship was still new. Since that visit, my friend's life has become quite challenging. I will not go into specifics, but she has faced some significant life changes and he has supported her throughout. We had been trying to find a date for her to visit me. I live with my partner, so she would stay in our shared apartment for a while, and we finally settled on her visiting for a week in March of this year. She asked if she could bring her boyfriend, and I told her yes, of course. I knew she had been struggling and how important he had been as a source of support for her. I also realized that if I said no, it would complicate her travel plans because driving was the most affordable option, and she did not appear to want to make a 10-hour cross-country drive alone, which is completely valid. This was my first mistake. I was unclear about my expectations for this trip and assumed we were on the same page. I had nothing against her boyfriend, but as I mentioned, I had met him face-to-face only once and otherwise interacted with him only during video calls. My expectation was that we would enjoy a lot of girl time and generally be able to commiserate about how our lives in our 20s were not turning out as we had imagined. Again, this was naive of me, but I was so eager to recapture a hint of how our friendship had been when we lived in the same city. As you can imagine, the dynamic shifts once it changes from the couple and the very close friend to the two couples. I instantly felt the shift because, of course, she was spending energy focusing on him as she should. They have their own shared history and it just feels different. Basically, as soon as they arrived, I think he began to feel unwelcome since I was primarily focused on my best friend. When I said I was unclear about my expectations, I meant that I assumed he would understand that I wanted some alone time and deep conversations with my friend, given how long it had been since we had seen each other. It appears that his expectations were for this trip to be an opportunity for him and me to become best friends. He has a very eager demeanor, and it was essential for him that we develop a good relationship due to my close connection with his girlfriend and how much she values my opinion. These are objectively wonderful qualities in her boyfriend, but this is where I began to feel uncomfortable. Right from the beginning, he treated me as if we were very close. For example, he called me by the nickname that only my best friend uses for me. He made jokes at my expense the way old friends do. He brought up intimate details about my life that I had only shared with my best friend. This made me feel quite strange. My best friend and I had instantly clicked in a way that happens only with a few very special people in life. Yet I usually require some time to feel comfortable around someone and to reveal my true personality. It felt like the period I needed to gauge him and determine what parts of myself I wanted to share with him had been taken away, as all of that had already been shared through my best friend, and he interpreted that as closeness. Once I began to feel uncomfortable with this dynamic, I indeed became more reserved, and I will not deny that. It is entirely reasonable for him to have perceived this as me not liking him or feeling unwelcome. The truth is, I do not dislike him at all. Would I choose to be best friends with him if my actual best friend were not in the picture? Certainly not. However, I think he is a great guy and has a wonderful relationship with my friend. It simply did not occur to me that I needed to be best friends with him or that he would take it personally if that did not develop. This entire situation caused some drama during the trip, and he became very emotional about feeling as though I did not like him and that I was excluding him from the relationship between my best friend and me. I explained to my friend multiple times that it was not about disliking him. It was simply that I was not yet comfortable and that I found the level of closeness he was expecting to be overwhelming. During these conversations, I also suggested that it was somewhat challenging for me, as her best friend, to fully invest in a friendship with him when he had only been in her life for about 7 months, and they had become serious very quickly. As I mentioned, she had experienced some difficult situations during their relationship, which I believe deepened their bond through shared adversity. This was not a judgment of their relationship, nor was it an attempt to diminish what they shared. The connection that people form when they navigate tough times together is undeniably real, and I truly did not mean to invalidate their relationship. I merely wanted to explain why I did not share the same affinity for him. Fast forward a few weeks after the trip, and she texted me on a Friday night mentioning that she had been reflecting on the trip and some things that were said, and she wanted to talk. I responded that I was open to having that conversation and believed it was important for us to discuss it. I have a significant amount of social anxiety, so after she told me this, I began to worry that this conversation might significantly change our friendship. Concerns about this discussion dominated my thoughts, and after 2 days without her initiating the conversation, I sent her a long message expressing that I was feeling quite stressed and would appreciate getting everything out in the open as soon as possible. She completely understood and apologized for leaving me hanging. She had encountered some unexpected family issues right after reaching out to me, which prevented her from prioritizing this matter, something I fully understood. Well, it has now been approximately 2.5 weeks since then. We exchanged a few texts about unrelated light topics for a few days while I waited for her to initiate the important conversation, but she never did. Now, it has been 10 days since I have heard from her. I recognize that 10 days is not an excessive amount of time, and it is typical not to communicate with someone, even a best friend, during that period. However, normally we text literally every hour of every day. I am not exaggerating. Even after moving to different cities, this was our pattern. I always knew what she was doing, who she was with, what she was eating, and so on, and she was aware of the same about me. The fact that I have not received a single message from her in 10 days is genuinely heartbreaking and is tearing me apart. At this point, it feels like a standstill where both of us are waiting for the other to reach out while simultaneously refusing to be the one to do so. This situation is profoundly difficult for me. I have begun recording audio files about my life, detailing the things I would ordinarily be texting her about. I spend many nights crying and reminiscing through our old messages and looking at past photos of us. Part of the reason this situation weighs so heavily on me is that I was already feeling insecure about how our relationship was changing when she became involved with someone. And now I feel as if this could signal the end of our friendship as we have known it. Not in terms of not being friends anymore, but in terms of the depth of sharing between us. I do not believe this is the end of our friendship, but I do think it may be the conclusion of what we used to be, and that is what is causing me the most pain. If you made it this far, thank you. Here is my actual question and request for advice. I want to text her because this is becoming ridiculous and we are grown adults. However, what should I say? How do I express what I am feeling without knowing the specifics about the conversation she wishes to have? Is there a way I can approach this that will make her more receptive to my message? There is significantly more context I could provide, but this post is already very lengthy, so please feel free to ask questions. Thank you in advance, everyone. Story 2. My best friend Kyle, who I've known since I was 17, flew across the country for my wedding with hopes I'd fall in love at first sight. I was devastated when I learned he was still in love with me after our flirtation. Now I can't shake the feeling of betrayal. What went wrong? A 28-year-old female met my best friend, Kyle, a 30-year-old male, when I was 17 years old. We connected online and developed our friendship by discussing a mutual passion for video games. Throughout our friendship, we mainly communicated through text and played games together, occasionally using phone calls and Skype, but we never met in person until my wedding to my now husband, a 28-year-old male. We have supported each other through everything, including family issues, relationship troubles, and work-related concerns. As we matured, our friendship remained strong. He was there for me, and I was there for him, as much as two people can be who have never met in real life. When I was 19, I became involved in a whirlwind romance and eloped with someone who ultimately did not turn out to be who I believed he was. I will skip the details. At 24 years old, I informed my ex that I wanted to separate. Kyle had been supportive during my relationship and remained so when I decided to file for divorce. Up to this point, to the best of my knowledge, Kyle had never had feelings for me, and I had never had feelings for him. We had always considered ourselves bros. As a newly single and attractive 24-year-old woman, I'm sure you can imagine what my inbox looked like. One evening, Kyle and I were texting, and while it started out normally, things gradually became more flirtatious. Again, I will spare you the details. A couple of weeks went by, and Kyle and I confessed that we were beginning to develop feelings for each other. The idea frightened me for various reasons, but against my better judgment, we continued for a while longer. It became clear to me that we were significantly trauma bonded. Then I made a really awful decision and ghosted him. Both Kyle and I struggle with mental illness. We both have fairly severe mood disorders, and at that time we were undiagnosed and unmedicated. I felt like I was becoming his personal therapist for several weeks. All he could discuss was how desperately he wanted to end his own life. That was the extent of our conversations. I would offer advice which he would quickly dismiss. If I attempted to change the topic, it would swiftly revert back to his struggles. Since I did not have the contact information of friends or family members who lived near him, I had no means to reach out to anyone who could assist him. One of our last conversations during this time involved me expressing that I could not manage his volatility and that I felt as though I were serving as his therapist. He apologized but did not make an effort to improve his situation. I reached my breaking point, and as I was undergoing a major life transition, I made the selfish decision to concentrate on myself. I stopped responding to texts, set my status to offline on social media and gaming platforms, and made myself as unavailable as possible. I still regret this decision to this day and recognize that it was wrong, irresponsible, and selfish. Weeks passed and I finally reached out to Kyle again. I conveyed to him nearly word for word what I just mentioned above, along with other matters like conflicting religious beliefs, overall sexual incompatibility, etc. He told me that he loved me. I responded that we would be disastrous as romantic partners, that I wished we could rewind and simply be friends again. I cared for him and I still do, but I was not in love with him. He informed me that while I had been away, he met a girl who lived locally. They had gone on a few dates and things appeared to be progressing well for them. I was genuinely happy for him. For several months after that, our friendship returned to normal. Our familiar jokes and camaraderie were renewed. Shortly after my 25th birthday, my ex and I received the court date to finalize our divorce. I got a small promotion at work and I made plans to travel with friends. I felt on top of the world. I also met the man who would later become my husband. I excitedly shared this news with Kyle and he genuinely seemed pleased for me. In retrospect, I wish I had noticed sooner that Kyle's communication significantly declined at this point. I attributed it to the natural busyness of adulthood and shifting life priorities. We still checked in somewhat regularly during birthdays, holidays, and exchanged the occasional meme or video that reminded us of each other. But the dynamic felt different. Kyle broke up with his girlfriend not long after, and he was involuntarily hospitalized after expressing his suicidal thoughts to one of his housemates. I felt awful for not making a more concerted effort to reach out to him more often and for not being more overt in offering my support. The notion of losing someone I still regarded as my best friend terrified me. I promised to check in more regularly, and he made the same promise. The positive aspect of his hospitalization was that he finally began working with a psychiatrist, received a diagnosis, and started taking medication. Looking back at our conversations, I can confidently say that I fulfilled my end of the agreement. From that point on, I initiated contact each time, and his responses were brief and curt. I suppose I just assumed he was always occupied or uninterested in my discussions, but he never proposed topics that interested him. It has become clear to me that we were drifting apart. 18 months after my now husband and I began dating, we got engaged. Our friends were thrilled for us except for Kyle, who remained silent. I reached out and he congratulated me, noting that things were improving for him. Over a few days, we engaged in more conversation than we had in years. It felt wonderful, reminiscent of old times. I invited him to my wedding as my bridesman. He became emotional and asked if I was serious, saying he would be honored to attend. After years of attempting to meet in person without success, Kyle purchased plane tickets, arranged transportation, and our wedding date finally approached. He arrived in town 2 nights before the wedding and stayed in our guest room. He and my husband instantly connected and discovered they had much in common. Kyle even told my husband that he reminded him of his best friend from back home. The night before the wedding, we all went to an arcade bar, and the photos from that evening are some of my favorite memories. The following day, my husband and I exchanged vows and everything went perfectly. We rented a large Airbnb for the night for ourselves and our wedding party, which comprised about 12 individuals. Kyle and my other friend, Alyssa, were both single at the time, so my husband and I agreed to attempt to set them up. The next day, we all departed from the Airbnb and went our separate ways. Kyle and Alyssa exchanged Snapchat information, and my husband and I shared a laugh, feeling like scheming fools. Overall, the atmosphere was fantastic. When Kyle's plane landed, he let me know he had arrived home safely as we had asked him to. My husband and I celebrated our first anniversary earlier this month. Over the past year, Kyle and I have communicated fewer than half a dozen times. One of those instances involved a genuine conversation, while the rest consisted of just memes and quick inside jokes. I have initiated all contact, and his replies have returned to being brief and curt. A few nights ago, I had dinner with Alyssa. She informed me that she and Kyle had been engaging in consistent conversation over the previous year. Most of their discussions are sexual in nature, but occasionally my husband and I are mentioned. She stated that when Kyle brings us into the conversation, he becomes sarcastic and crude, but when she talks about us, he suddenly appears angry and quickly finds an excuse to leave, resulting in several days of silence. Alyssa then told me, without leaving any room for doubt, that Kyle admitted he was still in love with me and hoped that by attending my wedding, I would see him in person and fall in love at first sight. Alyssa looked as though she might cry and mentioned that she had debated whether or not to tell me this information because she did not want to overshadow my memories of my wedding. Now, reflecting on everything, his behavior makes perfect sense. I feel betrayed and devastated. My husband is incredibly kind and supportive, but he is also understandably disturbed by the fact that another man, who was a stranger to him at that time, spent the night in our home while having feelings for me. I am filled with anger. I am heartbroken. I wish I could go back in time and stop it all before it started so that I could have maintained a platonic friendship with him. My longest friendship has become a Pandora's box because we were both incredibly lonely at the same time. I feel foolish for not recognizing it sooner. It is now clear to me that Kyle's failure to reach out first is a message, and I have received it loud and clear. In summary, my online best friend of 10 years only attended my wedding because he still had feelings for me after a brief period of sexting nearly 5 years ago. He believed I would fall in love at first sight and leave my husband for him. After a decade of friendship, that is the end. Story 3. At 25, I learned Nate, my childhood best friend who saved me from bullying, died from epilepsy last April. I didn't have the right to grieve, I think, guilt-ridden for not forgiving him sooner. Some friendships shape your soul. When they're gone, what's left? I am a 25-year-old female, and I discovered last December that my childhood best friend Nate had passed away in April 2024. I had not used Facebook much since the pandemic, and logged in around Christmas of the past December to message a few relatives who live in another country. I was curious to see what I had missed, so I did a quick scroll through my feed and came across a post from my former best friend's mother expressing how heartbroken she was to spend his birthday and the holidays without him for the first time. I continued scrolling on her page and found the obituary links from the previous April. He had died from epilepsy while sleeping. I was devastated and felt as if the world had crumbled beneath me. Now all I feel is guilt. We met in the first grade as table buddies in homeroom and cubby neighbors in art class. English is not my first language, and I struggled to keep up in both class and social situations. I was and still am an anxiety-ridden person. Nate was the first individual who genuinely tried to befriend me despite the language barrier. He reached out his hand, introduced me to his friends, and we played together during recess. He made me feel safe, having been bullied for my accent, weight, and Asian heritage frequently. He made me feel included and valued, and I genuinely owe my happiest childhood moments to him. We created worlds together on that playground. He read the Harry Potter and Percy Jackson books to me during lunch so that I could enjoy them as well, and he was incredibly skilled at making us feel as if we were in those stories alongside the characters. It was only years later when I read them myself that I realized he would add his own twists to the narratives or try to enhance the world building. I thought that Nate, our 3 other friends, and I would always be like that. 5th grade was the first school year we were not in the same homeroom, and it was disappointing. At least we still had recess. Slowly but surely, throughout that school year, Nate and the other boys began to exclude me from their games, stopped asking me to hang out, and suddenly the lunch table became boys only. I felt crushed. I had always considered them my friends, so to be shunned and to be the only one shunned felt absolutely terrible. In the last quarter of the year, I found out I was moving a few towns away, so I kept to myself until the school year ended. I, the ever-dramatic and hurt 5th grader, decided that writing each of them a letter and placing it in their yearbooks after the term ended would be a good idea. I was young, dramatic, and deeply hurt. Each friend received a short paragraph, but Nate received at least 2 pages where I poured my heart out to him and expressed how hurt and lonely he made me feel, and how much I resented him for abandoning me without explanation. Slipping the letter into his yearbook before the bus pickup was the last time I saw him. This was a time before any of us had phones or social media, so I did not hear from him or any of them again until the end of middle school. I created my Facebook account at the end of 8th grade and shortly after received numerous friend requests from people I knew from elementary school, one of which was from Nate. I accepted his request, and he would periodically poke me every few weeks. Eventually, he messaged me during my sophomore year, apologizing for hurting me. It turned out one of the other boys in our group, Willie, had developed a crush on me, and in order to avoid any potential drama, they all chose to ignore me so that Willie could get over me. I do not understand the thought process of a 10-year-old explained through the perspective of a hormonal 15-year-old, which resulted in a very confusing paragraph. At that point in my life, I was dealing with bullying and self-harm, and I lashed out at him in response. I was upset that I lost all my friends because someone had unfortunate feelings for me. I was outcasted due to something entirely beyond my control. 15-year-old me could not cope with that explanation and exploded at him, saying some hurtful things and using colorful language that I, as an adult, would not use. I told him never to contact me again, as it would hurt too much. There was radio silence for 2 years. He would occasionally leave supportive comments like "great job" or "happy for you" on my posts about achievements. The night before his high school graduation, he called me through Messenger. I was set to graduate a week later. He would be moving to a new state for university in the fall semester, while I would be doing the same just on the opposite end of the country. I was in a better mindset, and we discussed what had occurred in 5th grade and everything that happened since. He told me that he still had the letter I wrote him and that what they had done was foolish. I expressed that although I wanted to forgive him, I simply could not. 18-year-old me was a deeply wounded and troubled girl. She was depressed, recovering from an eating disorder, a survivor of sexual assault, and generally unwilling to allow anyone to get close. I told him he was my first friend and my first real betrayal, and that life had not been kind to me since they turned me away at lunch all those years ago. We both cried. He said he understood and that I was invited to his graduation party if I ever changed my mind, and then he hung up. I did not attend. That was the last time we spoke. We did not necessarily part on bad terms. That conversation healed much of the hurt from my childhood, yet we still left as strangers who once loved and cared for each other, and that will always be painful. Over the following years, we congratulated one another on various achievements and milestones through Facebook, but those were the shallow congratulations reserved for coworkers one hardly knows. Occasionally, I felt an urge to reach out. I found myself in his city several times and wondered if I should reach out and ask to grab coffee, but I ultimately decided against it. I wish I had not. We were just kids when we fell out. I recognized that it was foolish to have remained so guarded against him all these years, but I was simply too hurt, and when I learned he was gone, it felt like I did not even have the right to grieve for him. I did not expect the pain to cut as deeply as it did. It felt as if a black hole had formed in my chest. Last week marked the anniversary of his passing, and it still feels unjust and surreal. I feel terrible for not forgiving him when I had the opportunity. I clearly still cared for him to some extent. Otherwise, I would have blocked his account when he attempted to add me on Facebook all those years ago. I wonder, why didn't I just forgive him? I feel genuinely furious with myself. When a child loves someone, whether romantically or platonically, it envelops them. When I say Nate was my first and best friend as a child, I mean he was an integral part of my life's foundation. Now he is simply gone, and I still struggle to comprehend it. I will always remember the boy with the constantly crooked glasses who reached out his hand and invited me to play make-believe with him on the very first day of 1st grade. I will always cherish the boy who would let me play on his Nintendo DS because my family could not afford toys and games, or who would share half of his lunch with me during the 2008 recession when free school lunch was cut in our district because he did not want me to starve. I will forever mourn the friendship we shared and the connection I foolishly tried to distance myself from. Thank you for reading this from the awkward, shy girl at lunch. She grew up to love books and has Percy Jackson books in her personal library marked with little tabs where she added her personal touch to the story. Thank you for helping me learn how to socialize and stay true to my art. I am still shy, but I have found a group of artistic friends who support me. And thank you for trying your best to make amends. I am sincerely sorry I did not try harder as well. I turned 25 this year, an age you will never reach. I thought of you and how you used to say you would protect me since a knight always protects ladies, and I would roll my eyes and complain that you were only a month older than me. Turning 25 was bittersweet, knowing this is the first year I would be older than you. If you're still reading this, random stranger from the internet, do not make the same mistake. If you have fallen out with someone you genuinely cared about in the past, and you have even the slightest inclination to reach out to them to talk, I suggest you do. I do not care if it is to finalize things before blocking them or to mend the relationship. If even a small part of you wants to converse with them and they express the same sentiment, just do it. You will not always get an opportunity, so seize it while you can. Story 4. I yelled at my friend during game night, not realizing he has panic attacks. If you do this again, you're out, he warned, while I watched him break down. Now I'm terrified this friendship is crumbling before our conference trip. Will I be the outsider for good? Just 2 hours ago, some of my college friends and I were concluding our weekly game night. We were quite tired, It was past 11 p.m. and the conversation had shifted to the point where some individuals were simply ranting about politics. To my left sat the loudest friend in the group, and to my right was the friend mentioned in the title. There were two additional people at the table where we were seated. My loud friend on the left began imitating a particularly annoying politician, yelling to the extent that I had my fingers on my ears for a considerable time. I quietly asked him to stop yelling, but he did not hear me. I frequently request that he tone it down a bit. We have shared some friendly banter in the past, so I leaned up from my chair, placed my hands on his shoulders, and shouted even louder, playfully telling him to finally be quiet, which I believe we both understood to be in good fun. I did exaggerate my annoyance, but I do not think I came across as aggressive, just loud. I instantly regretted yelling at him, but he really annoys me at times. My back was turned towards the other three, so I did not notice that the friend on my right had apparently visibly startled at that moment, as I was informed later. I quietly apologized to everyone when I sat down again in an "I'm sorry, please continue" manner because everyone except the guy I yelled at seemed taken aback. The conversation continued at that point. Almost 2 minutes later, I heard my friend on the right say, "If you do this again, I will exclude you from here." At first, I was unsure if that was directed at me. It was. This was the first time I perceived that something was wrong, and I had no idea what I had done to provoke him to threaten exclusion from game night. So I inquired, and one of the girls told me, "I think it's pretty obvious." Everything grew incredibly silent, so I again asked if I had done something wrong. I often struggle with reading the room. No one wanted to divulge anything, but it was clear they believed I had done something wrong. The friend on my left told me that we would discuss it later. They quickly gathered their belongings and left for another room to clean up. The only two remaining were myself and the friend on my right who had just threatened to exclude me from game night. I did not connect this back to me getting loud, admittedly, very loud, a few minutes earlier. I honestly believed that my very mumbled remarks about politics before the conversation ended had been misinterpreted. I replayed everything I had said repeatedly, but nothing seemed wrong. The two of us were just sitting in silence for a bit, and when I glanced at him, I noticed for the first time how upset he looked, lightly crying, breath unsteady. He looked unwell. He asked me to leave for a few minutes, stating that he struggled with panic attacks. That was when the realization struck me, and I apologized for yelling. He told me it was okay and that I could not have known, but he still requested that I leave. I found the others a few rooms over. Some went back to check on him while I stood there staring vacantly, unable to respond when people asked how I was doing. I felt detached just thinking about how I had stood up and yelled, everyone acting like I had done something terrible, yet no one telling me what. I even made some hand motions to calm myself. The guy I yelled at wanted to explain the situation as well as our friend's panic attacks, but I told him that it felt too personal for him to share. I did not want someone else to reveal something that was not my business. He then reassured me not to feel guilty, reiterating that I could not have known about our friend being triggered by sudden yelling, but also mentioned it would be best for me to go home. I waited a few more minutes, but he was essentially the last person I saw. The other three were in a different room, and I did not want to disturb them. I felt bad and somewhat rude for leaving without saying anything, but I didn't want to exacerbate the situation. Now I just feel terrible about the entire ordeal. Not necessarily guilty. I know my actions were unwarranted, but I genuinely had no way of knowing the potential consequences. Just bad. I feel a little frustrated with everyone except the friend who had the panic attack, particularly with one girl for not telling me what was happening while claiming it was obvious. I had no idea until he informed me, and we aren't close enough for him to share that information with me. The only person I am truly close enough to call a friend is probably the loud guy. I am naturally shy and typically extremely quiet. I moved to this town a year ago, and it has been incredibly difficult to meet people and maintain contact. I only met this group a few months ago, and they are the first ones with whom I have managed to form a bond, but I have been struggling to actually grow close to them. I still feel like an outsider within this group. Even those who have known each other just as long as I have seem much closer. This contributes to why she claimed it was obvious, because she expected I had figured it out by now. She assumed I was as close with everyone else as she was since we joined the group around the same time, but I am not. I hardly know them. They have been nothing but kind to me today, yet it still feels as though everything I have tried to build is crumbling in my hands after this evening. I know my friend informed me that I could not have known about his panic attacks, but I'm still concerned this incident might have been too much for him, and our relationship may not be the same afterward. I really like him, but he has been the one I have found most challenging to talk to. The timing of this fallout could not be more inconvenient either, as we are preparing for a conference, a glorified field trip, as a larger group in 2 days. I was hoping to spend time with him there, but now I feel apprehensive about even attending, especially considering the sleeping arrangements might be a bit cozier. This entire situation has been genuinely distressing for me, as it seems like all my fears have materialized at once. A significant reason I struggle to communicate with people is that once I do, I can become extremely hyper and talkative within seconds, leading me to worry that I come off as overwhelming when people expect a quieter conversation. Now, I have actually been too much. I also have a deep fear of not being able to read the room and making a foolish mistake. Now I have done just that, and even those who knew about my struggles did not bother to inform me of what I did wrong. I did not want to disturb him any further tonight, but I plan to send him a text message in the morning to apologize, ask how he is feeling, and whether he would be okay with me attending the conference with him in a few days or if he needs space. I may also inquire if he wants to discuss this in person, depending on how things unfold. I genuinely want to. I had prepared a handmade gift for his birthday in a week. I got him to play Magic, the gathering with me during the few times we were alone together. I have been desperately trying to foster a deeper friendship with him for months now, despite his barriers. If he has erected any new walls, I am unsure if I can overcome them. I believe that everything will probably turn out fine, as it usually does. But the weight of this entire evening is weighing heavily on me.